Your Excellencies, fellow governors, Commissioner of the African Union Commission, honorable ministers and governors of the African Development Bank Group, heads of international, bilateral, and regional financial institutions, distinguished guests, good morning. On behalf of the Kenya government and Chair of the African Development Bank Boards of Governors, allow me to take this opportunity to welcome you all to Nairobi for the 59th annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. These meetings are being held closely after the recent meetings of the World Bank's IDA 21 Replenishment Summit that the government of Kenya was privileged to host, and His Excellency, the President of the Republic of Kenya, is a champion. I'm therefore delighted to welcome you back here at home in Nairobi. First, I want to begin by expressing our deepest appreciation for the warm and cordial relationship that exists between the African continent and our premier development bank, the African Development Bank. The African Development Bank mandate remains relevant and important to the African continent as it supports a wide range of development activities that have supported in many ways the process towards economic vibrancy, economic growth, job creation, improved incomes, and better living conditions for the Africans and the African economies. We wish to reassure the bank of our continued commitment to this fruitful partnership and collaboration. Allow me also to convey my appreciation to the bank group for delivering a very relevant theme for this year's annual meetings, which is Africa's transformation, African Development Bank Group, and reform of the global financial architecture. This resonates quite well with the current global agenda and discourse on the need to reform the global financial architecture to be responsive to the dynamic needs of our continent. I'm glad that the annual meetings includes high-level plenary session for the launch of the bank's flagship publication, the 2024 African Economic Outlook, a presidential dialogue and thematic knowledge events on the theme. And this provides us with a unique opportunity to address Africa's challenges and opportunities at the highest decision-making levels. Consistent with the theme of the annual meetings, the focus of the knowledge event aims to fast-track structural transformation in Africa. This is a panacea to faster socioeconomic transformation, in addition to addressing the importance of reconfiguring global financial architecture as an engine for structural transformation. It is comforting to note that the bank's group's contribution towards Africa's socioeconomic transformation in 60 years of existence, especially on infrastructure, has been such monumental, with a significant and important mark in spite of the limited level of resources when compared to other global multilateral development institutions. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we reaffirm our strong support to the African Development Bank, I urge colleague governors to deepen their discussions around the increase of the general callable capital. This will protect the bank's AAA rating on a sustainable basis against recurrent external shocks, including downgrade of its AAA-rated shareholders. This will enable the bank to maintain its rating trajectory and preserve its position as a strategic lender and the premier development finance institutions in Africa. But above all, reform that is consistent with the theme of the 2024 annual meetings. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in the midst of the global and even regional challenges, we have opportunities to reboot our policy framework and efforts to develop a more competitive and integrated economies in Africa that will attract greater investment. I therefore urge all of us to seize the opportunities provided during the annual meetings to bring forward practical policy discussions for corrective efforts in terms of mutual dialogue, stronger partnership, effective joint coordination for the realization of the African Economic Development Agenda. With these remarks, I wish all of you fruitful discussions and present stay in Nairobi, Kenya, which has many rich offerings outside your formal sessions that I would like to invite you to sample. Asante sana. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary General. Your Excellency, Dr. William Samuel Ruto, President of the Republic of Kenya, and our host. And I was thinking about how to really get your try to rights this morning. Congratulations on your trip to the United States, which was a wonderful state visit you had, but you came back with a new title. And it was called, by President Biden, the Major Non-NATO Ally. So you're going to start putting that behind your name, Mr. President. Thank you for welcoming us to Kenya. Your Excellency, Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo. Your Excellency, Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda. Your Excellency, Emerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Your Excellency, Mohamed Yunus Al-Menfi, President of the Presidency Council of the Government of the National Unity of the State of Libya. Your Excellency, Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia. Your Excellency, Musa Faki, my dear brother, Chairperson of the African Union Commission. Your Excellency, Prosper Bozum Mbaza, Vice President of the Republic of Burundi, representing His Excellency President Evariste Ndayishimiye. Your Excellency, Sarah Kungogelwa Amandila, Prime Minister of the Republic of Namibia, representing His Excellency President Nangolo Umumba. Your Excellency Ali Lamine Zain, Prime Minister of the Republic of Niger and a former staff of the African Development Bank. Your Excellency Alexandre Baro-Chambrier, Vice Prime Minister of the Republic of Gabon. Your Excellencies representing heads of state and government. Your Excellency Joachim Chissano, former President of the Republic of Mozambique. Professor Njuguna Ndungu, Cabinet Secretary of the Treasury of Kenya and Chairman of the Board of Governors of the African Development Bank Group. Your Excellency, I have two friends here because you asked us to work together globally. I'm delighted to be joined here by two of my colleagues that are presidents of multilateral development banks. Your Excellency, Dr. Mohammed Sulaiman Al-Jazar, President and Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank Group, and His Excellency Jean Lukun, President of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Banks. I'm joined by all my colleagues from African financial institutions and our partners, honorable heads of national institutions of the Republic of Kenya, my dear honorable governors of the African Development Bank Group, cabinet secretaries, excellencies, heads of diplomatic missions, my executive directors, my senior management and staff, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, my beautiful darling wife, Grace, my number one supporter, counselor, and friend. Thank you. Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all to the 2024 annual meetings of the African Development Bank Group. These annual meetings take on a special nature this year because it marks the 60th anniversary of the establishment of the African Development Bank Group. We are delighted that you all are able to join us on this auspicious occasion. I wish to thank His Excellency President William Ruto for accepting to host these annual meetings in this beautiful country of Kenya and the Sunshine City of Nairobi. I wish to thank you all our heads of state and government for making time to join us for this special occasion. We are truly delighted that all our shareholders are here, represented by our dear governors from all of our shareholder countries. Your collective support, advocacy, and financial commitments to the African Development Bank Group make us who we are and afford us the opportunity to serve as Africa's premier financial institution. We are inspired by the vision of our founding fathers and mindful of our position and the role within the global financial architecture, as well as the responsibility placed on us by the African Union to mobilize financing for Africa's development. We carry the hopes and the aspirations of Africa in our institutional genes and in our corporate soul. As we gather today, we do so against the backdrop of major global challenges, including heightened geopolitical tensions, the disruption of global value chains, rising food and energy prices, increasing debt service payments, and, of course, climate change. The devastating effects of climate change are everywhere, from droughts to floods, from cyclones to unpredictable weather patterns, with loss of lives and property, and enormous fiscal costs to countries. May I please kindly request that we all stand to observe a moment of silence in honor of those who lost their lives during the recent floods in Kenya and all other countries who have been devastated by the effects of the climate change they did not cause or even know about. Your Excellencies, please. Thank you very much. May their souls rest in peace. Even as we remember them, we must be resolute about taking decisive action to build more climate-resilient economies. And that's why I applaud President Ruto for hosting the landmark Africa Climate Summit right here in Kenya, where we collectively agreed to put Africa at the heart of global climate change efforts, especially climate adaptation. Your Excellencies, African economies are showing great resilience despite the challenges posed by climate change, geopolitical tensions, global inflation, and rising debt, among others. The African Development Bank projects that Africa's real GDP growth will rise from 3.1% in 2023 to 3.7% in 2024 and 4.3% in 2025. Importantly, despite these headwinds, more than half, and that is 31 countries, achieved higher real GDP growth rates in 2023 than in 2022. And most importantly, 10 African countries are among the 20 fastest growing economies in the world. I think we've done well against the headwinds. I think we deserve a clap for Africa. The African Development Bank Group strongly supports African economies. In 2023, our financing totaled $10 billion across all of our high five priorities: to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. These high fives, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, are the accelerators of Africa's development. The bottom line is that the African Development Bank delivers. Since we launched these high fives in 2016, our financing has impacted the lives of over 400 million people. Last year, our work has significant impact across the continent, with 11 million farmers provided with access to improved agricultural technologies, 8 million people provided with access to new sanitation services, 3.5 million people with access to improved transport, 2.8 million people provided with better health services, 1 million people provided with access to clean water, and over 443,000 enterprises provided with access to finance. The African Development Bank is highly responsive. When the Russian war in Ukraine erupted, it posed tremendous food security risks to Africa. To forestall a crisis, the bank launched a $1.5 billion emergency food production facility to rapidly support African countries in their ambition to reduce food dependency over a 2-year period. As of April 2024, we have approved loans and grants of $1.496, to be precise, billion for this emergency food production in 35 countries. We also got help and support from our shareholders, $323 million of additional support from the government of Japan, the government of the United States, Norway, Germany, and the Netherlands. We have therefore fully committed $1.8 billion to 35 countries. I am pleased to report, Your Excellencies, dear governors, that we have reached 10.5 million farmers and supported the production of 26 million metric tons of food, valued at $10.79 billion, or 90% of our target market value, and we still have about 2 seasons to go. Your Excellencies, dear governors, the African Development Bank is a strategic partner of choice, trusted by countries. Right here in Kenya, when I came to see His Excellency President Ruto, he talked about our support making a huge difference at the State House. As he mentioned to me, President Ruto mentioned to me that when I visited, he says, thanks to the African Development Bank, we increased the number of households in Kenya that have access to connectivity to electricity from 2.5 million to 10 million by 2023. Thank you for that testimony, Your Excellency, Mr. President. On one of my trips to a village where the bank supported last-mile connectivity for low-income households, a lady whose name was Grace, and that's not Grace, my wife, because she's also Grace, told us about the impact of our work. When asked if she knows Dr. Adeshina as I was walking in front of her, she said no. When asked if she was aware that the African Development Bank, as President Ruto was saying, financed the project, she said no. All I know is we once were in darkness, now we have light. Our impact is felt where it matters most, in the lives of the people we serve day and night. The African Development Bank has consistently invested in infrastructure. In the past 9 years, we have invested over $50 billion in infrastructure projects on the continent, by far the largest investment of any multilateral development bank or institution. And the impacts are visible. We are raising $3.2 billion for the East Africa Standard Gauge Railway connecting Tanzania, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Burundi. We are providing $500 million towards the development of the Lobito Corridor to link Zambia, Angola, and the DRC. We are mobilizing $375 million for financing the railway linking Nigeria to Niger Republic. We are mobilizing $3.5 billion to $5 billion towards the development of the Liberty Corridor that will link Liberia and Guinea. We have worked with our partners under the Africa Investment Forum to mobilize $15.6 billion of investment commitment towards the development of the Lagos-Abidjan corridor. Together with Africa 50, whose board I share, and it's a great institution, we are mobilizing $630 million for the construction of the road and rail to link the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo. We are financing the Guasib-Nado Highway in Morocco and the 1,000-kilometer highway linking Addis Ababa to Nairobi and Mombasa, which has expanded trade flows between Ethiopia and Kenya by 400%. That's who we are, a solutions and impact-driven bank. The African Development Bank, your bank, is in very strong financial shape. We have maintained our AAA rating, the only AAA-rated financial institution in Africa, by all global credit rating agencies. The bank posted strong financial records for the year 2023. First, income from loans and treasury investments increased from $775 million in 2022 to $1.73 billion in 2023, an increase of 123%. Second, the net income before distributions at $545 million is the largest ever in the history of the African Development Bank. Third, the amount that we allocate to reserve to build our liquidity buffers, $335 million, is also the highest ever in the history of the bank. I wish to thank the executive directors of the bank and their advisors, as well as my senior management and staff at the bank, for their hard work and efforts, and please join me in thanking them. Yet, as we make these efforts, we recognize that a lot more financing is needed to accelerate Africa's growth and development. The calls for reforms of the global financial architecture is necessary to mobilize even more financial resources to achieve Africa's sustainable development goals. The G20 Capital Adequacy Framework called for multilateral development banks to optimize their balance sheets, to raise more financing to support countries. The African Development Bank, Your Excellencies, our dear governors, ladies and gentlemen, heeded that call. We have been at the forefront of several financial innovations to achieve this. Last month, the African Development Bank issued a hybrid capital on the global capital market, the first ever by a multilateral development bank, creating a new global asset class for investors. These $750 million hybrid capital will be leveraged 3 to 4 times to expand the bank's lending capacity. I am delighted that 2 weeks ago, the Executive Board of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, approved the use of the special drawing rights, SDRs, as hybrid capital, which is based on the proposal developed by the African Development Bank and the Inter-American Development Bank. If the approved limit of $20 billion of the SDRs is channeled to multilateral development banks like us, we can leverage these to deliver at least $80 billion of new financial support. I would like to use this time to thank you, our heads of states and government, for the advocacy that you have maintained on this particular issue at every single step, and also for the chairman of the African Union Commission, my dear brother Musa Faki, for all of the advocacy that you have also maintained, and for all of our governors for supporting us in this particular area. We are very grateful. Thank you very, very much. Now, I wish to ask for the support of all of our shareholders to make this a reality. Your Excellencies, dear governors, ladies and gentlemen, to tackle climate change, the African Development Bank is well on its way to reaching our goal of mobilizing $25 billion in climate finance. Last year, we devoted 45% of our total lending to climate finance. Our climate action window, under 16th replenishment of the African Development Fund, with support from the governments of the United Kingdom, Netherlands, Germany, and Switzerland, opened its first call for proposals. The response was amazing. It received over 2,000 proposals, and the 359 shortlisted application requests were close to $4 billion. The bank, your bank, is building strong and effective global partnerships to deliver more for Africa. Through the support of the G7, we are accelerating women's access to finance through what we call the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, or AFAWA, in partnership with the Africa Guarantee Fund, which is now working with 169 financial institutions in 43 countries. And I would like to say that Africa will go faster when we make sure that it flies with two wings. No bird flies with one wing. When we support our women, they actually run most of our economies. I think Africa will go faster, more inclusively. AFAWA, Your Excellencies, their governance is the first ever gender-focused collateralized significant risk transfer with counter guarantees provided by the government of Netherlands and France in support of scaling of finance for women. So far, AFAWA has approved $1.7 billion and financed over 18,300 women-owned businesses. And by the end of this year, AFAWA will have reached $2 billion in support of 30,000 women-owned small and medium-sized enterprises. Your Excellencies, they are governors to support youth entrepreneurship in Africa and to create youth-based wealth. The bank has established youth entrepreneurship investment banks in partnership with the French Development Agency, Agence Française de Développement, and other partners with support from the bank's multi-donor Youth Entrepreneurship Trust Fund. Ever since our board approved the first two Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks in Liberia with $16 million of funding, and Ethiopia recently with $12 million of funding, several countries, including Nigeria, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, Tunisia, Togo, Egypt, South Africa, Zambia, Botswana, DRC, are working on submissions of their request. Your Excellencies, the bank is working with several partners to ramp up support for digital and creative sectors to create more jobs. Together with Islamic Development Bank, and my brother Al-Jazar is here, and the Agence Française de Développement, we financed $618 million IDICE program called Initiative for the Development of Digital and Creative Enterprises in Nigeria that will create 6 million jobs and add $6.4 billion to the economy. The African Development Bank, Africa 50, and the African Union established what's called the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, or AGIA, which will mobilize $10 billion for green infrastructure in Africa and speed up Africa's green transitions. I am delighted that at the G7 Ministerial Conference in Italy just a few days ago, they gave global endorsement for AGIA. Together with the Islamic Development Bank, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the OPEC Fund, the Arab Bank for Economic Development in Africa, the Africa Export and Import Bank, and the West African Development Bank, we are establishing what's called special agro-industrial processing zones in 11 African countries, including a $3 billion facility by the African Development Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, and the Arise platform. Your Excellencies, they ask us to work together as multilateral development banks, and we are doing that. At the spring meetings of the World Bank Group, President Ajay Banga and I launched a joint bold effort to connect 300 million people in Africa to electricity by 2030. We will host this year, together with Your Excellencies, an Africa Energy Summit later this year. I must say, this marks the first time for our institution. So not only are we reforming, but we are also changing how we work together as a system to deliver greater impacts at scale. That's because together we can and we will achieve more. Your Excellencies, for generations, women in Africa have borne the brunt of risks and hardships associated with cooking. Nothing could be more important than ensuring 1.2 billion people, majority of whom are women across Africa, have access to clean cooking solutions. I didn't start using glasses because I went to university and got smart. I started using glasses because as a kid, I was blowing charcoal into the cooking stoves of my mother. And when she bought a cooker, for which we can turn on the gas. It was blue. I had to invite my friends to come and see it. In fact, I was turning it on because of the smell, because it was so different from the kind of smell that I used to have. So when we are talking about energy transitions, that is the kind of transition some of us have gone through. And therefore, I believe no woman and no child should ever have to die from the risk associated with smoke inhalation and other hazards, because today we lose 300,000 women for trying to cook a decent meal. Another 300,000 of their kids dying for trying to cook a decent meal. Enough is enough. It's not just about lighting a stove, it's about life itself. It is about dignity for women, and it's about protecting the environment from massive deforestation and a reliance on biofuel, biomass, firewood, and charcoal. And that's why I was honored and privileged to co-chair the Clean Cooking in Africa Summit with Her Excellency Samia Suluhu Hassan, the President of the Republic of Tanzania, who did a marvelous job, His Excellency Jonas Thor, the Prime Minister of Norway, and Dr. Birol, the Executive Director of the International Energy Agency. The African Development Bank led the way by committing to provide $2 billion towards clean cooking solutions for women over the next 10 years. I am delighted that the summit in Paris raised an additional $2.1 billion in commitments, bringing the total commitments to clean cooking to $4.1 billion, a historic achievement and a testament to the power of partnerships. Thank you very much. I thank you, all our shareholders across all 81 member countries, for providing us the support and the resources we need to serve Africa better. With your continued support, we will drive a bolder, bigger, and better agenda for Africa. I thank you, our partners, for joining your hands with ours as we deliver more together for Africa, and as we have done for the last 60 years. I thank you, our dear heads of states, your excellencies, heads of state and government, as you lead and as you show passion and commitment to the African Development Bank Group, to our continent, and for your generosity towards our efforts with you in your countries. I thank you, our boards of directors, for always mobilizing support for us in your countries, and for relentless efforts you make to back our innovations and initiatives. I thank you, our boards of directors, for your strong oversight and support. And I thank you, my staff and colleagues, for being the best staff one could ever hope for. When I was recently interviewed, I was asked, what will I miss the most at the end of my 10-year term next year? I didn't have to think far. I said, my staff. So I'd like my staff to please stand, all my staff to stand. Guys, you're the best. Thank you for all that you do every single day. Please sit down. Together, let's all drive Africa's development forward, relentlessly, innovatively, and in more impactful ways. I remember when you elected me in 2015, I said at the time that this is not a job. This is a mission. After all, nothing could be more important than somebody being given the responsibility and the resources to go and change the place of our birth. So let's continue to make a difference, and let's continue to make Africa proud. Thank you all. God bless you all. Asante sana.
Your Excellency, Denis Sassou Nguesso, President of the Republic of Congo. Your Excellency, Emerson Mnangagwa, President of the Republic of Zimbabwe. Your Excellency Paul Kagame, President of the Republic of Rwanda, Your Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, President of the Republic of Somalia, Your Excellency Mohammed Yunus Memfi, President of the Presidential Council of Libya, Your Excellency Mohammed Musa Faki Mahamat, Chair of the Africa Union Commission, Your Excellency Evangelist Akiwumi Adesina, President of the Africa Development Bank, Your Excellency former President Joaquim Chissano of Mozambique, Your Excellencies, Vice Presidents, Prime Ministers, representatives of heads of state, Your Excellency, Governor of Nairobi, Johnson Sakaja, Madam Martha Koome, Chief Justice and President of the Supreme Court of the Republic of Kenya, Excellencies, Ministers, Honorable Governors, ladies and gentlemen, I am delighted and privileged to preside over the opening session of the 59th Annual Summit of the Africa Development Bank Group. On behalf of the people and government of Kenya, I extend a very warm welcome to each of you and invite you to feel at home in this land of many delights. It is a great honor for Kenya to host the 59th meeting of the Africa Development Bank Group, especially as the group celebrates its 60th anniversary. Let me put this in context. We had also the privilege to host the 30th anniversary of the Africa Development Group in 1994. We are privileged to host the 60th. And I have requested the Africa Development Bank Group to offer Kenya the 90th anniversary in 2054. And I promise that even if I would be walking with a walking stick, I will attend. This milestone should frame our deliberations and engagements during these meetings. We are gathered here to reflect on the progress of our continent that has made in realizing the founding vision of this institution, the Africa Development Bank. Formed in the first decade following the independence of most African countries, the Africa Development Bank embodies the Pan-African ideology of sovereignty, prosperity, and unity. As a matter of fact, one of the founding communiques of this institution clearly declares the determination of African nations to use all our resources to lead all African countries to independence and achieve the development and prosperity of the continent in unity. That was done 60 years ago. And over 6 decades, the group, like the continent, has not only survived many crises and challenges, but has also grown stronger and achieved much in supporting economic growth and stability in our continent. It has become Africa's premier development financing institution. To date, it has financed 5,432 projects across our land, 4,036 of them which have been completed, provided a mechanism to coordinate the fight against poverty, improve the standards of African financial institutions and other institutions, and contributed significantly to conflict prevention and resolution. You agree with me, ladies and gentlemen, that Africa development's performance has been nothing short of sterling. I think they deserve a better round of applause. Nevertheless, the pace of African economic growth and development has not kept pace with the rest of the world. More concerning is that the pace of African development remains far behind its undeniable potential. Intra-African trade remains low, with its share of global GDP less than 3%. Africa's share of global trade is also low, at just about 2%, and our exports are primarily unprocessed produce and raw materials. Not surprisingly, the rates of poverty and unemployment are still high on our continent. The vulnerabilities arising from this situation undoubtedly contribute significantly to conflict, economic refugees, and in this age of frequent extreme climate shocks, climate refugees. There is tremendous urgency in developing and implementing transformative interventions to turn things around for our continent, our countries, and our people. I am confident that this sense of urgency resonates very strongly amongst African leaders, and I am encouraged that we are not just doing something about it. We are actually making very good progress. Our continent is growing at the world's fastest rate, exceeding the global average of 3%, and 11 of the world's fastest growing economies in 2023 were African countries. We were told that by Adesina. Between 2000 and 2002, Africa's real GDP increased at an annual rate of 4.3%, well above the global average of 2.9%. 7 of the 10 world's fastest growing economies were in this continent of Africa. The Pan-African economic integration agenda has finally taken off. Our regional economic blocs are vibrant and effective, while the African Continental Free Trade Area has come into effect and already made a huge impact. Although much remains to be accomplished before intra-Africa trade is smooth across borders, the data indicates strong positive movement following the launch of the Guided Trading Initiative. As we look into the future with this optimism, we are also cognizant of the immediate challenges we must confront and overcome. Africa faces multiple serious challenges, including geopolitical risks, the broader effects of armed conflict, the COVID-19 pandemic and its effect, disruptions in the global supply chains, and persistent extreme weather due to climate change and macroeconomic instability. To compound this crisis, the economies of the continent continue to bear the burden of rising costs of servicing huge national debts, caused in part by high global interest rates and, of course, external shocks. I am, however, confident that the strong positive response by African leaders and nations to the Africa Union Agenda 2063 signals our collective intent to undertake radical transformation of African economies, achieve sustainable development goals, and unite our people in prosperity. We have what it takes to succeed, and current activities show movement in an encouraging direction. To achieve this transformation, a consistent commitment of substantial resources is required to invest in infrastructure, industrial capacity to deliver rapid growth. However, we face the rigid barrier of global financial architecture that is fundamentally misaligned with our aspirations. We routinely borrow from international markets at rates far above those paid by the rest of the world, often up to 8 or 10 times more. These rates are said in something arbitrary called risk profile that is notably not applied when considering mineral extraction, even in areas of active conflict. It is safe, we are told, to mine in spaces where there is conflict, but it is risky to lend to African economies. What a contradiction. The debt problem faced by many countries, which consume the largest share of national resources and starve development agenda, we are a direct result of this unjust financial architecture. This situation not only makes debt unsustainable, but also undermines growth, prevents countries from investing in resilience, and denies millions of people, especially young men and women, their fair shot at life's opportunities. Africa remains most vulnerable to the effects of climate change, by recent devastating floods, for example, in Kenya, and drought in Southern Africa, from which we are still working to recover, as well as other climate-related disasters across the continent. The adverse impact of climate change or the fiscal sustainability of many economies, especially in developing countries in Africa, deserves our serious attention. Despite contributing only 4% of global carbon emissions, we bear the brunt of climate change effects. Climate change is a threat multiplier. Its direct impact and related responses negatively affect our fiscal position through reduced revenues and increased public spending. The frequency of extreme weather events continuously diminish the resources available for public investment and provision of critical public goods, such as health, education, and other social services. In particular, climate change has often resulted in substantial reallocation of resources towards mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. This is why Africa advocates for a financial architecture that integrates the issues on climate change and public finance at the center. I am proud of African heads of state who have not hesitated to make their voices heard in various fora, including through the Africa Leaders Nairobi Declaration on Climate Change and Call to Action that we held here in Nairobi. Climate change and sovereign debt are now firmly integrated, trapping governments in a vicious cycle where increasing losses and damage from climate impacts leads to rising costs of mobilizing resources for public investment. With such high financing costs and constrained government budgets, developing countries continue to struggle investing in low carbon and climate resilient development. At risk, therefore, are both climate action and our sustainable development goals. A better, more responsive, and fairer international financial architecture is urgently needed, and time here is of the essence. The financial architecture we advocate for as Africa today should integrate the continent's most challenging development issues of sustainability and climate vulnerability to enable development goals, SDGs, and Agenda 2063 commitments to be achieved. I am encouraged by Africa Development Bank's vision for the continent, underpinned by the high fives strategies and the objectives of the newly adopted 2024-2033 10-year strategy, which provide important foundations for these critical continental objectives. Let me agree with my brother, President Adesina, on the array of investments that he has spoken to this morning. Kenya is among the beneficiaries in a very big way of Africa Development Bank's financial might and their innovative financing of projects. Let me give you just 3 examples. Africa Development Bank became the first institution for us to build the first superhighway from Nairobi through Thika, and today they are dueling the same road all the way to Maroa, about 150 kilometers. Africa Development Bank worked with us to provide water and sanitation in 28 towns and cities in Kenya that today all of them are complete. And Africa Development Bank is building with us the largest water dam in Kenya in a place called Tuake. And of course, Africa Development Bank did what Adesina said. Last 10 years, working with Africa Development Bank, other multilateral banks, and friends, they have enabled Kenya to increase electricity connectivity from 27% in the last 10 years to 76% today. We have been clear and consistent in our advocacy. Africa is neither seeking handouts nor asking for charity. We are a continent of sovereign people who aspire to grow in a just multilateral system and access development financing on fair terms. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not too much to ask. We were clear at the Africa Climate Summit last year when we called for reforms of the international financial institutions and a range of new global taxes to fund climate action. We were clear at COP28 in Dubai last December when we once again emphasized the urgent need to mobilize investment for climate transition in developing countries from public and private sources globally. We also agreed to support the creation of markets that can mobilize resources at scale and called for the reform of the international financial architecture. Today, we assert that transforming the international financial architecture is an imperative that will give Africa a fair chance to turn its immense potential into opportunities to overcome multiple challenges and develop inclusively and sustainably. I take this opportunity to reiterate my call at the recent concluded IDA 21 summit here in Nairobi, that we appeal for a substantial 17th replenishment of the Africa Development Fund by at least US $25 billion to increase its capacity to continue providing concessional financing to the least developed African countries. We therefore call on our donors and development partners to scale up their investment in our continent's premier development financial institution, the Africa Development Bank. To further strengthen the capacity of our multilateral development institutions, we strongly support the proposal to rechannel special drawing rights through the Africa Development Bank as endorsed by the Africa Union's Assembly of Heads of State and Government. And because we must believe in ourselves for others to believe in us, and we must invest in these institutions for others to invest in them, Kenya has made the decision that over the next 3 years, we are going to invest $100 million in enhancing our shareholding in Africa Development Bank, Afri-Exim Bank, and Trade Development Bank. We have already made the investment in Afri-Exim Bank. I will be discussing with my brother Adesina on our investment in Africa Development Bank, because as nations in this continent, we must begin to understand that if others had to believe in our institutions, we must believe in them first as the owners. The multiplier effect of the rechanneled SDRs will significantly increase the lending capacity of the Africa Development Bank. This initiative has the potential to unlock additional financing for high priority and transformational development projects, which are currently constrained by available resources. Kenya pledges to continue championing SDR rechanneling through the African Development Bank. And Mr. President, as a demonstration of Kenya's confidence in the Africa Development Fund, the concessional window, we are making a commitment of $20 million as Kenya into that kit. It is Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. It is a demonstration that for us to raise $25 billion, we need to demonstrate our commitment and believe in the investments we are making in this institution. Nobody doubts that investing our resources in Africa Development Bank is a logical, it is a profitable investment. I have since had I was motivated by the profits I saw and the dividends that will be paid. And I think it's a very worthwhile investment. I want to encourage public and private entities to equally invest. I promise you it is a worthwhile investment. Given the glaring shortcomings of the current climate financing ecosystem, we need to fundamentally reconfigure prevailing financing patterns and adopt more innovative financing structures that eliminate access barriers. I commend the Africa Development Bank Group for developing innovative financial instruments tailored to our continent's unique needs. These instruments are more ambitious in financing and our significant development projects, including heavy investments in smart agriculture and clean energy generation. However, more financial resources need to be channeled towards climate adaptation in Africa. At my last meeting with President Adesina, we were discussing them extending our water program, which we started with the Africa Development Bank, to phase 3, where we are discussing now a $400 million facility with the African Development Bank for water harvesting, water storage, and irrigation that will support Kenya's food security, especially in the context of the effects of climate change. Ladies and gentlemen, at this juncture, I wish to underscore the critical role of the Africa Development Group's annual meetings in advancing progressive discourse, structured dialogue, and knowledge events. These engagements provide an opportunity for collective deliberation and facilitate the dissemination of relevant knowledge among high-level decision makers in Africa from different sectors, including government leaders, academics, and the private sector, among other key players. The 59th annual meeting takes place at an important juncture in our continent's developmental history. I am confident that all of us gathered here are able, willing, and ready to apply ourselves accordingly and do justice to our common agenda of taking Africa to the next phase of transformation through constructive deliberations. Let me say this finally. My colleagues, the heads of state and government in Africa, asked me to take over the baton from my senior, President Paul Kagame, on reform of institutions of the Africa Union. It is an assignment I intend to work on with the support of my colleagues, to align it with aspirations of today, and so that we can support more financial institutions like the Africa Development Bank and all the other continental institutions to support Africa's development and progress. Our agricultural development assets, our human capital assets, our natural resources assets, and use them to create investment opportunities so that we turn our potential into opportunity and opportunity into investment and create a better Africa for all of us. Number two, to make Africa Union a fit-for-purpose organization to take charge of the consolidation of the African market through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Today, in Africa, intra-Africa trade is only 15%. Intra-Asian trade is 60%. Intra-European trade is 70%. Intra-Africa trade is 15%. We are struggling, looking for markets everywhere except in our continent. We must believe in ourselves. We must first sell to the market that we have in our continent. It is the silver bullet. And it is what is going to increase the contribution of trade from Africa from 2% to the next level. Number three, we must make Africa Union fit for purpose to secure the continent. The Africa Union must take charge of our peace, security, and stability. The Africa Union must solve the problems of conflict and war in our continent. We cannot progress as a continent if there is war in Sudan, there is trouble in Somalia, there is problems in DRC, there is problems in the Sahel. We must take charge of our security. We must take charge of our stability, and Africa Union must step forward to be counted to provide that cover. And finally, the Africa Union must work with us to close the infrastructure gap. We will be proposing 4 assignments. The Africa Union was initially a liberation movement. We must repurpose it. We must re-engineer it so that it addresses the challenges of the moment. We will also be making a proposal to have a much more accountable Africa Union. Today, the Pan-African Parliament has no connection to the Africa Union executive. We are proposing that we are going to reduce the size of the Pan-African Parliament to make it much more cost-effective, from 275 members to 100 members. One woman, one man from every country. And make it a full-time organization. Let it approve the budget of the Africa Union. Today, the budget of the Africa Union is approved by people who are not people's representatives. We want the people of Africa to take charge of this continent. And finally, we must bring about the Africa Court of Justice so that we can sort out our issues. We don't want any African to be dragged to courts elsewhere to sort out our issues. We need something short of a revolution to have a good organization for ourselves. I look forward, ladies and gentlemen, to the output of these meetings, and I am optimistic that your recommendations for reforming the architecture of the global financial institutions will be as radical and as ambitious as the AU's Agenda 2063. Your participation here promises viable solutions to enable our countries mobilize sufficient resources to close Africa's development financing gap and accelerate our structural transformation across the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, the 59th annual meeting of the Africa Development Bank Group is now officially opened. I thank you.